Lost my notes already. That's quite impressive.
We should stop talking about our evil plan to take over the world now that we're live on air, right?
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. We don't want people knowing about that. It's too goddamn evil.
Oh wait, shit! People weren't supposed to know that existed at all. Shit.
Now we're buggered.
Oh well. Phil, you can welcome the people.
Yep. So welcome everybody. Thank you for paying attention on IRC. That's not really the start. Just a quick favor for everyone in IRC: don't click any of the links that anyone's put in there because some of them might actually be invites to the hangout, and please don't come in here or I'll kick you out.
So, someone, like everything is being said. I'm hearing repeated back to me.
So what you've got there is you've got the event page open somewhere, and it's on a slight delay. So you want to go and delete the event page. Close the tab. Don't close this tab. And also, I'm going to ask people to mute themselves if they're not saying something, just because I can hear some feedback somewhere.
Okay, chaos for me just ended. It turned out I had PHP Town Hall open in Chrome, which I completely forgot about.
I'll do it.
If you just said anything important, I didn't catch it because I was hearing my earlier words repeated over it. So
I don't think I've ever said anything important.
Okay.
Right,
It's
everybody. Wait, stop. Right, I'm gonna do the intro.
We need the intro for the actual audio.
the intro.
So we're episode 38, right?
Yep.
Right. Hello.
Yep.
Oh. Hello, everybody. Hello to all our listeners. No, see, I tried something new and I hate it.
Hey, welcome to episode 38 of the PHP Town Hall. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have Andrea Faulds and Levi Morrison here along with myself, Ben Edmonds, and Phil Sturgeon eating a egg sandwich.
Hello. I'm sorry, I was hungry.
Andrea and Levi are both repeat guests, so thank you for joining us again. Andrea, remind anyone who doesn't know by now, but who are you?
As you can see by this profile picture here, I am clearly a croissant and not a real person, but I am a croissant who has contributed some things to PHP. I did. I can't think of anything particularly important. The current thing I'm working on, though, is the scalar type hints RFC. Also spaceships, but they're not important. Scalar type hints are more important.
All right, we'll get into the type hinting in just a moment. Levi, introduce yourself, please, sir.
So I am probably best known for my return types RFC, which just passed. Yay! Nothing too special. I've designed the PHP.NET website, so if you hate it, I'm the guy to blame. And I've been here before, so I don't know really what else to say.
All right, so let's get into it. Tonight we're going to have a epic battle about the type hinting RFC. Phil, you want to give us a little background on what it is, and then they can argue about why they disagree. Or, just stare at me.
Sorry, did you say me or?
I said Phil.
Apparently I say croissant better than anyone Kayla Daniels has ever heard.
What does that mean? What?
I know, apparently I say the word croissant nicely.
Croissant is the correct pronunciation, as opposed to croissant if you're a lazy American and don't say words properly.
My French is terrible. Anyway, back with the program.
We can keep that bit in there. So a quick overview. I think we talked about it briefly on the last episode, or the on episode 36. Sorry, 37 was a bit of a shit show, which we'll be hearing soon. But scalar type hints essentially are leveling up the type hinting system to add some types that we don't have currently. So since PHP 5.1, you've been able to type hint saying that an argument passed into a function or method should be an array. Since 5.4, we've been able to say that it should be a callable, so a callback. For a while we've had class type hints. So you could say you could type hint for a interface or a class or a trait. But
yeah, I think that was PHP 5 was the class type hints. So for 10 years.
Yeah. So for a really long time, we've had this like half-done type system, type hinting system. Sorry. And for the longest time, there's been discussions about trying to fix it. There's been multiple RFCs. Even this latest RFC is on the third iteration, and it's very different from the first two. So this has been something I've seen going on for a really long time, and I'm sure all of you, the pair of you on the internals team, have seen it going on for a while. But the very latest version of this RFC is kind of an interesting one, because for the longest time, one of the biggest divides has been between the folks in the weak type camp and the strongly typed camp, right? So this RFC is trying to appease both in a very logical way, and I think it's pretty damn awesome. So at this point, it would probably be better to hand over to Andrea to explain what's going on with the RFC.
Yes, it probably would. I guess. So PHP has, like many programming languages, sort of two different types of type. Okay, that's confusing. Two different kinds of type. You have sort of basic values, like integers, floats, booleans, strings, and technically the obscure thing called resource, which is what you use for like streams and stuff, but resources are stupid and some of us want to get rid of them very soon, so forget they exist, they're kind of weirdos. But you have integers, sort of strings, booleans, and floats, they're your scalars. And then you have your complex types like arrays and objects and array. Well, it's just those two in PHP's case. And in PHP is traditionally this sort of weak type, dynamically typed language. You can assign a variable with one value, like the number 1, and then change it to a different value. And it also performs implicit conversions between types. So if you get some data coming in from a web request and it's a string, you can use it in a function expecting an integer. And PHP will automatically, and sometimes horribly, sometimes wonderfully, convert it for you. And so it's a language in which you don't have to worry very much about types. And it's this sort of weak type system where we have this implicit conversion, and dynamic typing where you have this where types are not determined at compile time, they're determined at runtime, and they can change, which is one of PHP's biggest strengths. But one of the downsides of this is that obviously, because it's dynamically typed, because it's weakly typed, you don't have, looking at a function's definition, you don't know what types its arguments takes unless there's some comment somewhere. So, and also, furthermore, nothing stops you passing in the wrong type. If an integer is expected, you can pass in an object, and though PHP will complain, it'll probably complain too late. So one of the things that was done about this is in PHP 5, when we sort of revamped the object model. We previously did have classes, but they weren't very widely used, and they had some quirks in PHP 4. And in PHP 5, we just like threw out the entire thing and redid it mostly with some minor backwards compatibility, and said, actually, we're going to do objects this way now. And one of the things that was added was type hints. Essentially, on a parameter, you could stick the name of a class in front of it, and if you tried to pass as an argument to a function to that parameter an object
Right,
of
so
the one class.
let me jump in a little bit. Most people probably know what type hinting is.
Yeah,
currently.
but you,
So how does this current RFC change that?
so yeah, at the moment you can type in an object, and if it's the wrong object or if it's not descendant or an interface, it'll error. And yeah, as Phil mentioned earlier, we also later added a callable type hint and an array type hint, but we've never had type hints for scalar types. And the main reason for that is,
which are int, float, etc.
yeah, strings and booleans.
In case someone's not familiar.
The main problem there is that we there is a disagreement some people don't want them at all, but the main problem is really disagreement over how they should work. Because on the one side, you have the traditional sort of weak typing where it would allow an implicit conversion. If you put an integer parameter, say, allow you to pass a float and it'd be converted. On the other hand, there's this strict typing. And strict typing is where you don't allow any implicit conversion. If you ask for an integer and pass in a float, it's wrong, it's an error, and there's a lot of disagreement over that area. So there have been various proposals in the past, but this RFC tries to strike a balance. Rather than doing just one or the other, it adds a set of scalar type hints, int, float, bool, and string. And by default, if you pass, say, a float to an int, it'll convert it to an int and accept it. It won't accept something like an object, but it'll accept an int or a string or a boolean or a float. For an integer parameter, say, it will allow conversions. But if you don't want, and the same is true for return types, but if you don't want to, if you don't want this weak typing behavior, you can switch on strict mode, and then any function calls you make will instead use strict typing. And if it asks an integer,
so with that, if you were to pass, say, a float for an integer, it was just going to throw an error in that case.
Yeah, or if it's string or boolean, or basically any type of an integer.
So let me throw this back to Levi. What's been the main contention in the RFC process against this RFC?
Declare is disgusting, man. Like,
I agree. I don't like declare very much.
It's horrible. When she first proposed declare in the PHP Stack Overflow chat room, room 11, I thought she was totally joking. Like, declare is just so bad and nasty. I thought, no way.
To be fair, I kind of was at first, because the first time I saw it suggested, like, I think it was suggested 2, maybe 3 times in the discussions around an earlier version of the same RFC, which didn't have this declare thing, which was just exclusively weak. For people who don't know about that, that was version 0.1. The one that introduced this dual mode weak and strict system was version 0.2. Someone suggested it, and at first I thought, this is a really bad idea.
It's a really bad idea.
I said as much. But then actually I kind of warmed to it, although I must admit I don't like the syntax very much and I want to change it, but we'll probably get onto that.
A quick one. With the declare syntax, most PHP developers probably don't actually know what it is.
Exactly.
Declare is so far only used to like enable ticks, and I couldn't really tell you what that is. Levi, could you tell us about declare a little bit more? What it currently does, why you hate it?
No, I can't. I know that it's used, the ticks thing is used in the process control extensions. So, like, I think some of the threading perhaps uses it, or I'm not exactly sure, but the syntax is weird. Its scoping is weird.
Yeah.
It's not used. Like, I have never, ever, thankfully, seen this thing in production before. Ever.
Yeah.
All right, so the scoping here, to break it out a little bit, is scoped per file. Is that right? If you declare.
Well, more accurately, declare itself, the RFC is sort of mostly per file, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. The declare statement is this odd little thing. I don't know who invented it. I don't know why it was added. But initially, it was only there for ticks, which is this weird thing where it will call a function every X things. So every time some certain thing that I forgot happens, it will call a function. If you use the ticks declare, it's really, really weird. It's been around for ages. And then in PHP 5.3, which was how long ago? 4 years ago? 5 or 6 years ago. In PHP 5.3, we also added an encoding directive. So if your file is in some weird character set, you can do declare bracket encoding equals then a string with the encoding end bracket semicolon. But yeah, it's really weird syntax. It has weird scoping rules as well.
All right, so basically declare is not really used. No one knows what the fuck it does. Yet we're proposing to use it here. But that's not the real contention, right? It's just declare syntax, because that's not what the old guard is fighting against. So let's say we switch to one of the other proposed syntaxes for this. What is the other argument against it?
So the other kind of camp, besides the people who just hate declare, like I hate it. Like I have other reasons, but I could not in good conscience vote yes to any RFC that uses it. Aside from that, there are a lot of people who don't like the duality or like the option to choose. Like they're kind of all or nothing in one camp. Some people say like, I just want weak hints, or I just want strict hints, or I don't even care, just pick one. Just only one though. We don't want two kinds. And I kind of follow that as well. Like I don't think, like I know the intention to some degree is to cater to both camps so that the people who want strict can have strict and the people who want weak can have weak. But for me and explicit types, I feel like everyone should be on the same page always. Like PHP is quirky already, and I don't want to have any nuanced behavior based on whether or not somebody changed this declare thing somewhere, right? So that's another big thing, is that people don't want both. There's another argument that some people don't want you to be able to have strict types, period.
Hold on, let's decode that a little bit. So you're saying nuanced if someone changes it. So you're thinking you're using library X. Library X sets that it's going to use this new typing, and then you're integrating library X. So is the concern there that when you use that library, you're going to have different typing requirements than you would in your regular code? Or am I misreading that?
So the way it's up to the caller. So if you declare your strictness, and then you call some functions, the point at which it's called, that's where whether it's weak or strict is determined. Just to pause for a second, let me double check. That's correct, right, Andrea? Right? Your mic's muted.
Sorry, Andrea, I muted you there. There was some background noise. I can actually answer that one. Where you put the declare, if you are calling functions, then the effect of the behavior of the functions you're calling is what's affected. So it's not like you can install a random library from Composer and then all of a sudden that starts changing the way that your application works. It's if you have a file called foo.php and you install any library that uses type hinting of any sort, then it will all behave in the weak way. If you enable declare at the top, then it will start to become strong. So it's yeah, just because we haven't been talking about it too clearly so far, it basically means that by default everything is completely weakly typed, and if you put a little line at the top, then everything is strictly typed, which is currently the exact same way Hack works, but they use a slightly different syntax. So
what syntax are they using on Hack?
They use a comment up at the top. You use / strict.
Yeah, the reason Hack uses comments and it's not a sort of proper language syntax thing is because in Hack, all the type checking is actually done by this type checker that runs before you actually, the code is actually run by HHVM. It goes through this type checker program, so you can type check things without actually running your app. And I think it's completely ignored in Hack at runtime. The type hints don't do anything. I mean, they're used, but this is going off topic, but it's basically just Hack has a comment. Yeah.
okay.
Put in they do this. This is in the oops, I misspelled strict. But that's what they do up at the top.
Yeah. So you have the PHP open tag / strict. Now the other syntaxes I've seen floating around to do this, because Levi, you're not a big fan of the declare syntax, and that's fair enough. It's a bit odd. I can live with it, but it's a bit odd. The other syntaxes, how do you feel about any of those? Because some people are suggesting use strict, which looks a bit like a namespace, or like importing a function via the use stuff. Or the other one is just the open PHP tag and then just the word strict, which would be a little bit weird because it's like a magic keyword that hasn't got any colon at the end. You know, what do you think about those options?
I don't know too much whether I lean any specific way on there. I think before getting there, I didn't actually get to talk about my complaint about the caller. I was just verifying that I had it correct before I ranted.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we're really not.
The reason it's a problem is, I think, if I understand it correctly, and I've been really busy, so I haven't been able to check out the patch and verify whether this is or is not a concern. But because it's caller based, if I have a function inside of there that returns a weak return type, like it could be let's say it's a database ID, and sometimes those are strings, sometimes those are integers, but I don't really care, and I take an integer, now I have to worry about whether the person who called me is strict or not. So theoretically it would work for the people who have weak, but when you enable strict, that subchain will fail suddenly because of the code inside of there. But that may not quite be true, or there might be ways around that. I haven't got to actually test it because I've been pretty busy. But
if I could sort of answer that as best as I can, the way it's supposed to work and the way so far in all my checking that my code actually works, so the way it's supposed to work is that by default, scalar type hints would be weak, which means that they allow some conversions but not all. So basically, an integer by default, well, there's 8 things to go over in weak mode. It's a little complicated, but here it goes. So by default, you have this weak typing mode. If you call a function with an integer typed parameter, it'll accept either an integer, a float that's within the same range as an integer, which isn't a problem on most platforms, but it is sometimes, a string that looks like an integer, or a Boolean, because obviously true is equivalent to 1 and false is equivalent to 0. But if you pass any other value, say a resource or an object or null or an array, it's an error. But otherwise, if it's one of the scalar types I mentioned, it'll convert. Similar thing for float. For string, it'll accept, again, the other scalar types. But if it's an object array or null, it'll be an error. Same sort of thing for Boolean. So in the weak typing mode, if you call a function, by default, you're in weak typing mode, and if you call a function, it'll convert the parameters if they're the wrong types to some extent anyway. With return, and by default, return types have the same treatment, which is somewhat controversial anyway. So alongside that, you have the strict mode. And well, in strict mode, if you call a function, it doesn't matter where that function was declared, if you call a function which has scalar type hints, those scalar type hints will be strict. So if you're in strict mode and you call a function that takes an integer parameter and you pass, say, a string or a Boolean or any other type, it'll be an error. But if you pass an integer, it's fine. And it's the same sort of thing with string. If you pass a string, that's okay. Any other type, it's wrong. The key thing, though, is that and you decide that you want to go into strict mode by putting this line at the top of your file, either the declare syntax, or hopefully we'll be replacing that with something slightly better, like use strict maybe. It says that you want all the calls you make in that file to be strictly type checked, so it won't allow these conversions. But crucially, it doesn't affect, if you write a library and you use strict, it doesn't affect anyone calling you. So if you put type hints on your parameters and they call you and they don't want to use strict typing, they don't. It's just because they're in weak mode, all the calls they make have weak type checking. But that has very little impact on you because all the values you get are converted. If you pass a float to an integer parameter, you as a function author will always get an integer, whether originally it was an integer that was passed or it was a float that was converted. Then there's return types. Then there's return types. Return types are dependent on where the function was declared rather than where it's being called from, because obviously if you return the wrong value, that's an error on the part of the function author, not on the part of the caller. So if you declare strict mode in a file in the library, your return type is always strictly checked. And if you don't choose strict mode, obviously it's always weakly checked. And who calls your code has no effect on the return type, but it does on the parameter types. Sorry for the long-winded explanation.
So I've put an example over in the chat. So there's this function f that calls a function that returns a string form of an integer, and then calls a function that requires an integer as its first parameter. And then you can declare strict and call f. Does it error?
Let me analyze this.
Because as far as I understand it, and this may be incorrect because I've been quite busy, but that will error. But that doesn't seem like it. That seems like it shouldn't error.
I don't think that'll error. No. The code that you put. So the code that Levi
Right,
put.
so let's break this down a little bit. So he's defining a function that returns a string, and then he's declaring strict, and he's calling it, and he's asking if that will error on the typing.
It's more complicated than that. It's this weird. So he makes.
See, okay, so pause.
Okay.
The fact that the RFC author has to say it's more complicated than that is another indication to me that this isn't what we want.
No, it's not, because Ben's explanation was an oversimplification of what you'd written.
Which, to be fair, is a fairly tricky example.
You made an anonymous function f, and inside that function, it assigns ID from some function return string, some function that has an integer return type, but actually returns a string value, so it end up converted. And then it takes the ID and passes it to something that requires an integer.
Okay, so pause. That was a little unclear on the way.
Then, after the end of the declaration of that function,
all right, hold on.
declare strict mode, and then call that anonymous function.
All right, Andrea's muted. I'm moderating tonight.
So,
all right, so Levi, hold on. This is mainly an audio show, so try to give us a succinct example of your question using words that people can follow along at home and understand. And then we'll move on to that.
We're not all core contributors, so we wanted to keep this fairly simple, which so far we haven't done because lots of long words are being used.
So if I declare a function we call f, and inside of that function, I call some other function that gives me a string that has inside of it an integer. You'll often get that coming from a database. Where it will be a string form of the integer. Some databases will.
So you're saying, like,
won't.
To get back, actually, like, quote, quote, 1, it's an integer inside a string.
Yeah, it's an integer inside of a string. Right. Yeah. And then inside of that same function f, we make a call to a function that requires an integer parameter. And I pass that ID that I got back, that string 1 value, and I pass it to that function that requires an integer, and then that's the complete function f. So then after f is declared, if you use this weird declare strict equals 1 proposal and then call f, the question is, does it error? Because it's up to the caller, right? So the callers say that, oh, that thing is a string, the requires int function needs an integer, and string is not an integer, so it will error. But in weak mode, that would work. And the reason it's a concern is because that's not code, potentially, that you wrote, right? If you put that function f in some library, it could break depending on the strictness. Now, I wanted Andrea to clarify that, but it seems, based on my understanding, that it would break.
So, okay, not quite. In this specific case, this is this is a rather confusing example, partly because you've used an anonymous function, which, I mean, it doesn't actually, using an anonymous function doesn't change anything, but it makes it a little harder to understand the code. So the strictness, the strictness depends on the file where the call is. It doesn't matter where in that file it is, but, well, ignoring some of the details of declare for a moment, because I want to get rid of those details. Basically, the type checking mode, the call, depends on where the call is in the file. So if you put strict at the top of the file, all the calls in that file, including in functions, will be in strict mode, otherwise they're in weak mode. So in this specific case, what you have is your, let's for a second forget the return string int. Let's say that it's just this function that calls another function. So this function,
all right, so maybe this is too complicated of a question to explain.
I did not expect this to be.
I can explain it. It's just difficult to. It's just the example you've given is something.
It does seem a little bit contrived. It's another one of those examples of code that if you actually do this, then you should be slapped. It's one of those sort of things that there's loads of things.
I totally disagree. I totally disagree.
No, actually, so I agree with
sounds
Levi
really complicated,
here.
which is somewhat against the point of the of what I wanted to do on the show.
The problem, it's not actually very difficult to explain in writing at all. I could explain it quite simply, but explaining it in audio in mother. Okay,
we're going to skip this example because no one can see the example.
I'll try and explain instead a series of sort of simple things. So, say you, so the most basic thing, say you have some function someone's declared. Okay, let's go with a function everyone knows, the sine function. You know, as in sine, cosine, tangent, right? If you're in a, by default, file is in weakly type checked mode. If you don't declare anything, it's weak mode. So if you call sine with, say, a string with the number 1 in it, it'll succeed because PHP converts that string containing 1 to a float, and then someone just
this is not a simple
screen share. Yeah, but
this is not a simple example, Andrea.
So you call sine.
All right, so Andrea's been muted. Moderator.
None of these responses are simple. We're begging for simple responses, and none of them are simple.
This is simple, right? If you call currently in PHP, if you call sine with a string that contains the number 1, it'll succeed because PHP converts that string to a float, and then it passes it to the sine function, and you get back whatever the sine of 1 is, right?
Yep.
That's simple enough. If you turn on strict mode at the top of that file, now all the calls in that file are checked strictly. So it sees sine expects a float, you've passed a string, that's an error. Fairly simple so far.
Yes. How does that relate to return types?
So if you say you make a function, I'm not even going to try and pretend. I tried to make up a use case on the spot, but I'm not trying to this time.
Right.
You make a function with a return type of int, and you return a string containing a number. It's not super nice behavior, but by default, with this proposal, with no strict declaration, you're in weak typing mode. So you've returned a string, an integer is expected. PHP will convert that string, if possible, to an integer and return it. Everything is fine. It doesn't matter where you call that function from, even if it's some strictly typed code. It doesn't matter. It will use weak type checking. It will convert that value. So you returned a string containing 1. PHP converts it to an integer because that's the return type we declared. The return value of that string to anyone who uses it is an integer. No errors.
That's more complicated than anything you've said so far. So one way of putting this really simply, you have two files. You've got a file called index.php. Imagine it's a basic front controller, whatever. Index.php, that's where you're calling stuff from. And this stuff happens to be in a file called functions.php because you don't care about OOP. You've got index.php and you've got functions.php, which is full of functions called fill and bar, and who gives a crap what the names are. So in index.php, you're calling these functions. These functions have type hints, string, integer, whatever these functions are. If in index.php you start trying to call function foo and it expects an integer, and you throw it a string, if it can be converted, then it will use it. That's fine.
Yeah.
If in an index.php you then enable declare strict types, if you enable strict typing from index.php, anytime you try and call a function in functions.php, it's going to freak out. But anything inside functions.php, it's no different. It's no different from how it normally is. You said I want an integer. You've got an integer. That's all great. Now, the only effect it has on return types, if in my functions.php I've said this foo is going to return an integer, and I try throwing a string in there because I'm a lazy shite developer, then PHP is going to work that out. PHP is going to go, all right, I can do that. That's easy enough. I'm just going to shite out this thing that's an integer, even though I've passed it a string integer because I'm lazy. And then that's the end of it. So you as a function developer don't have to worry about whether the person calling it has got it enabled or disabled. It doesn't matter at all to you because you've written your code, you've asked for an integer, and you've got an integer. You've tried to give it an integer. You gave it a string, you twat, but it's fine because you're still returning an integer. Yeah. So both parties are completely separate. They don't care which mode they've got or which is turned on, and it just works perfectly, basically.
Yeah, so basically the way that I've done things is that if you turn on strict mode in your library, say in your code base, you have to do it per file because basically there wasn't a sensible way of doing it per directory or anything that would really work out very well. So basically, if you turn on strict mode in a file, suddenly the world that file sees is entirely strictly types. There are type errors.
All right, so let's be clear about this because there's a question in IRC. So when you say per file, you don't mean within the context of that .php file. You mean from that point forward in history. It applies.
More accurately, within that file.
Okay, hold on. So in that file, you require another file. That typing would carry over to the required file, correct?
Not quite. So the declare syntax is awful, and it allows things like switching modes mid-file, and I'm going to ignore that because it makes things more complicated, and I want to get rid of that anyway in the future RFC. The details of that are explained.
But you see why I'm so opposed to it, right?
Yeah. I understand why.
I understand your point better than ever now, Levi.
Forget.
After 45 minutes of not understanding anything Andrea's maybe you're just too smart for most of us.
45 minutes already. Oh dear God, this is.
But hang on, for the benefit of this conversation, let's just assume that declare's going away because it sounds very much like declare might be going away anyway. If we're talking about enabling it per file, then if I've got functions.php, right, we're going back to this example just for the sake of simplicity. If I've got functions.php and I've enabled strict typing in functions.php, then anything I call from functions.php, the requests I make to them, so the calling is also going to be strict. So me calling functions to, because I've got even more functions now. Me calling functions.to, that's going to give me a strict error if I pass shit information into a string to function, a function to function, right? But the return types, again, that doesn't matter. You have to declare it in every file for it to be strict in every file. Does that make sense? Levi, does that make sense?
Yeah, it probably does. I expect that Ben Edmonds says, "Sorry, AGF, you have to explain to us userland dummies." It's not like that. It's just that conversing between four people in speech about this. It's very simple to explain in writing.
Hey, I have a quick question about the format. You said it's primarily an audio show. What about video? Because we could screen share basic.
We could. That's probably a good idea.
Let's whiteboard some shit and we'll cut it out of the audio. All right, edit point now, David.
Let me see.
Let's work this shit out.
I have Vim open. I could screen share that. How do I do that? How do you screen share? Oh, I found the thing. It looks like a reply button.
Can you guys see my terminal?
Can you guys see my terminal?
I'm gonna go get a beer. Hang on, I wasn't gonna drink, but.
Where's...
So do you guys see my terminal? Anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see it.
So I kind of wrote partially what Phil was talking about. So this thing up here, this is
you could. Oh, just
index.php.
a suggestion. You should like put both files into one file on the screen. Like, I mean, I know they're separate files, but so that you don't have to keep switching, you should probably copy one to the other. And
I think for the sake of
Now you all know I play League of Legends in my summoner name.
oh,
yeah.
oh wow, look at that.
There we
Look
go.
at
Separate tabs is a good shout.
Like a pro.
Does anyone else need a drink before we get into this?
Yeah, I've just got to open this bottle of beer up. Hang on a second.
How are we on font size for the viewers? Can someone comment on that?
That's good from what I see. So.
This is really not going how it was.
Oh, no, it's not going.
But I do want to pause and take a moment to say that
I think actually
there are two major things. So declare is nasty. I think we've kind of all agreed that declare is just this horrible piece of junk. And two, like having the duality of being able to switch between them and when it happens and what is strict and what is not is kind of confusing, right? Like it's more difficult to explain.
I feel like it's been
the real problem actually is lack of code samples, because if you don't have code, you have to not only explain the behavior, but you have to explain the code. And reading code out is difficult. So you don't read out, you say, oh, it's a function that does this, and it becomes really complicated to follow in your head because without seeing the code. So I think this will make it better.
Yeah, this example is what I was saying.
Shout out to Sammy K. Your tweet made me laugh. Good job, sir. All right, Phil, can you lock it onto the terminal screen, please?
Yeah, it's locked on. Locked on.
Oh god.
It's I don't think it's locked, is it?
What?
Anyway.
We're 55 minutes in and we haven't really gotten anywhere. Oh, well.
Okay, we can edit this down a little bit.
Oh, a little bit.
Everyone take a little breather.
Maybe we should
For all those listening at home, listen to us type, and then you'll understand.
Maybe we'll just edit out 50 minutes.
Hey, this is Andrea and Levi. Type hits are horrible. Next episode, please.
Oh yeah, no, we can just have.
We just get an audio clip of Andrea saying.
Earlier statement.
Just get an audio clip of Andrea saying, "Actually, you know what? Fuck it."
I probably said that earlier, didn't I?
Yeah. So, Levi, how are you feeling about this example? You done?
So I think really it's more of a question. Well, I don't know how complicated you want to get, but so if you have this function foo int that you call, and you're in weak mode, and it takes this int, you're okay because that string value of 1 can be safely converted to an integer value of 1.
Yeah, and this is what built-in PHP functions like sign and so on already do.
Yes.
And this is what this proposal will do by default when you're in weak mode. Yeah.
So one of the questions that I know some people have is, and I'm not completely sure on, is if you declare strict right here, it actually affects these calls up here, doesn't it?
No, but forget declare for the moment and put it.
Can we just
file?
Declare?
But it's important because this RFC that's voting right now,
okay,
this is a detail. And okay. I know you're going to say, yeah, we can change it later, but if it never passes later, then this is what we're stuck with.
Okay, sure. So declare.
All right, hold on. So to be clear, declare is the current RFC, and there's no way to
Yeah.
modify that until it goes through voting.
Or you pull it out of voting.
Yeah,
So
but it's
What's the
would be
downside of
probably
pulling out of
better not
voting, fixing it, and putting it back into voting?
because ending voting and restarting it causes complete mess. Because I've done it before, and it's not really something that I've done it more
Is it a
than once
political
before.
mess, or is it a timing mess, and that it wouldn't make it into 7?
It's a practical mess because you've just had 84 people, sort of had to be coaxed out to actually vote in this long, protracted battle, and you're sort of forgetting that and starting over again, and it probably skew things because people who are only around sometimes and saw it vote last time might miss it this time and all that. Basically, I don't really want to redo the vote. It'd be a bit of a mess. But if we're to talk about the declare syntax, the declare you've done there won't do anything because it's the end of the file, and you don't have anything after that in your code. You're now adding, so what will happen if you look at Levi's code is the fooint calls at the top, they'll be okay because the file's implicitly in weak mode. And then below that, you have this declare call, which will affect the call that comes after it. So after that point in the file, you have this fooint call with a string parameter with value 1. And in this case, it'll error because we're now in strict mode. So you're passing a string, PHP expects an integer, and because it's in strict mode, that's an error. You can only pass an integer. So that's simple enough.
So let's say that instead I have this here.
And then you call
instead
bar from index.php.
And then I call it here. I'm in strict mode here, right?
Yeah.
And over in this file, I haven't declared anything specific.
Yeah, and by default, any file, unless declared otherwise within that file, the file is in weak mode. So in this case, what happens is you call bar, and if it had function, so you're in index.php, you've declared it strict. You call bar. If it had any parameters that were scalars, strict typing would come into play, but it doesn't, obviously, because it has no parameters. So it then calls this function bar in functions.php. Functions.php is in weak mode because it hasn't said it's in strict mode. It calls fooint with a string because that file uses uses the weak typing mode. PHP converts it, and it's fine.
Because it's internal. Basically, there are so many more ways to say this easier, but in any file that you're in, whenever you put declare strict equals 1, strict type equals 1, anything from below that, any calls you make or any returns that you make, anything below a declare equals 1 is going to be strict about it. So any calls to other methods, any returns from those methods, they're all going to be strict. If you make a call to another file, it depends what that file's up to, but you don't care because you're still giving it the input you expect and having it respond in the way you expect, and you're getting returns back from it, either weak or strong. It doesn't matter to you which they used because you're still getting it. So it's only about the interactions that you have with other files, with other functions.
Okay, so for this to work properly, though, say your framework or your library should not choose, correct? And it's going to be completely chosen by the user.
You get to choose. How should I put this?
So let's say we chose, like between the fooint declarations, if we chose, would that affect bar, or does that not matter because bar is not being executed?
It has no impact on bar. So
okay.
The way I like to explain it is,
so let's throw it on the screen. So Levi, throw a declare on line 10.
And this file, or an index or function?
File, the functions. So if we were to declare here, it would have no consequence, correct? Because it's not being executed in this place.
Let me see. Can we switch back to Levi's screen?
It should be there. You might have to click it.
Oh, great. Okay, so the declare, so the functions.php now has a declare in it. That declare has no impact on index.php. It's constrained the the declare statement is entirely constrained to the file it's in. And usually you probably should just have it at the top of the file, but for the moment we're using this example. In this case, fooint is declared in functions.php before the declare statement. So it's in weak mode because everything is by default. And that return type in fooint, is validated weakly, doesn't matter where it's called from, because it's in weak mode. So after that, after we've declared fooint, we set it to strict mode in functions.php, and we make this function bar. Now, because bar has been declared in well, actually, forget bar. The fooint, there's this fooint call in bar that calls fooint with this string containing 1. Now, when we're in weak mode, that would succeed. But because this file, from that point onwards, is using strict mode, that will fail. And it will always fail no matter who calls bar from where, because bar is declared in strict mode, and more particularly, the function call in bar is declared in the strict portion of the file.
So I feel like this is kind of ridiculous, and it's continued to be ridiculous, but going with it, I feel like this is much like GoTo, when GoTo is usually hated and with a passion, and people think that it does crazy things, and they're really scared about the readability and the execution of their applications. In other languages, GoTo is fucking crazy. So you can jump from one file to another, from the top to the bottom, from the left to the right. You can jump to Tuesday, and it's scary. But in PHP, GoTo only jumps within that one file, so that makes it much easier to do. By giving it the limitation of just the one file, much like this declare does, then you actually have a much easier understanding of where things are and what they're doing. So if you see declare that strict equals true, everything below it in that one file alone will respond strictly if you call or return something. If you don't have it there, then it doesn't do that. There's no like, oh, in this file it now does it for every other file, and oh, but you did these functions in the wrong order. It's
all right, so let me put this in another
that
context. It would be similar to doing like an I and I set, correct? Because then it's
no.
The difference. So declare is technically a compile time directive. It doesn't do anything at runtime. It's not. It basically just controls.
Hang on, I've got this.
I've
got this. Come on, I've got it. It's easy.
Vote no on the RFC, because if we don't change declare, this is what we're stuck with.
No, shut up, Levi.
That's my message to everyone watching.
Absolutely. So the difference with any set.
You're muted now, Levi. I'm sorry. Sorry, everyone else is muted.
So any set would have a global change. Oh god, I've got to mute everyone myself, haven't I? So if you were to these declare statements are nothing like any set. Any set says from this point on, any file that's loaded, anything that happens, whatever is going on for the entire process, the entire execution of the page, then this is the way that this is going to work. Whereas a declare statement is from this point in the file to the bottom of the file, which is why you should put it at the top of the code. The fact that you can move it is kind of weird, but you can. Same with namespaces. You're meant to put those namespaces at the top of the file, but how many people do you see like wrapping a function in a namespace and then having 3 different namespaces? Doesn't happen, and it shouldn't happen because it's gross. But this is very different to any setting, because you're doing it on a per file basis, which is much more helpful. And you just look at the top of the file, say, does it say declare? Yes. Okay, we're strict now. I'm going to have to unmute someone else to take over.
All right.
Does that make sense, Ben?
Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you, Mr. Sturgeon. All right, someone else can unmute and talk now. Our audio is already bad enough that we have to...
We had questions, so we should probably stick to those instead of this kind of free-for-all madness.
All right, so I have one question. Let me find it here. All right, so if you were to pass through an object to something that's requiring a string, but that object has a toString defined in it, what would happen?
I can answer that one. PHP will convert it to, we'll call the toString method and use whatever that returns, which personally I'm not sure if that's a good feature of PHP. It might not be. But it is what PHP already does for its built-in functions, and one of the problems with previous RCs was basically that with the weak typing mode, they made it substantially different from what we from what PHP's built-in functions do, and I wanted to avoid that. So there's very little difference. There's a minor one with the handling of null, but there's very little difference from what internal functions do. You can pass an object with toString to strlen, for example. So equally, you can pass it in weak typing mode to a function with string, and it'll be converted.
In either mode, correct?
Sorry, in
weak only will it be converted, or in strict?
Only in weak mode. Strict obviously is not only allows exactly the right type. The declare. So you have this question above with bars declare strict. This is one of the main problems of the declare syntax, is that it doesn't really respect scoping. It literally only affects stuff below it in the file. It doesn't matter whether it's in a function or a method or a class or wherever. You can stick it virtually anywhere. It'll declare anywhere in the file below it. So you could stick one mid-function. It would have no effect. It would basically just affect everything below it in the file, regardless of whether it's in a block or not, which is bad. You can see why people don't like declare very much. No, you can't. You can't just stick massive.
I'm here to provide an opposing opinion. My opinion is this is just foobar, right? Like I would not. This is one reason I'm voting no. This is one reason my vote is no, and then nobody's changed my vote. Some people have flipped back and forth, and to some degree, they're kind of at the point where, like, look, I just want explicit scalar types of some kind, so yes, I'll vote yes on this RFC. But I'm of the opinion that shipping anything with declare, even if we overwrite it later, like, there's a possibility we won't, that Andrea's proposal to use some other nicer, saner syntax could fail or just not happen for whatever reason, and then this is what we'd be left with. And so my opinion is that no, we should absolutely not vote yes on this RFC, because this RFC as it stands has so many confusing behaviors, and declare is definitely a big culprit, which is one reason I brought it up first and didn't let it just get brushed off, because it's a really big deal. It's a very big deal.
The reason I brush it off is it is worth taking the time to explain, but it's a lot. It's more easy. It's easier to explain declare second after explaining it on a per file basis, because that's easier to understand in terms of sort of order of the order of things you explain it. The declare though. So basically, actually, the behavior can actually be summed up very succinctly in one sentence.
I really doubt this. Let's do it. One sentence, Andrea. Let's do it.
So the function. So you have weak mode and strict mode. I think it's fairly well understood what those mean, right?
That was one sentence.
So the declare statement affects all function calls and return statements in the rest of the file. It's not more complex than that. It's not simpler than it is as simple as that. It's not more complex than that. It affects all return statements and all calls in the rest of the file. It doesn't affect other files. It doesn't affect other files that are included. It doesn't affect a file that includes it. It has no effect at runtime. It simply changes the type checking mode of the following calls and return statements in the file, including calls and statements and functions, but that's implied.
Nailed it.
All right, that was about two paragraphs, but that's a sentence, I guess. That was much more succinct, though. I appreciate that. So we had one other question that was asked, but I think we already answered. Let's go ahead and throw it out there. Can you use declare twice in the same file?
Yes. The preferred, so you can use it. You can actually, with declare, you can turn it off, which I think is possibly a good thing, because in some cases declare has its disadvantages, but one of the things is if there's a good reason you might want to make one particular function call not be strict and everything else be strict. And if you wanted to, and if you need to for some reason, you can with declare. one of the things declare supports actually is blocks. So you could do declare open curly brace, end curly brace, and put code in there, and it'll only affect the code inside that. After that declare block ends, it's back to whatever the setting was before. So you can put in a call there, and it will be strict. And you can also do declare strict equals 0, and it won't be strict within that block, or if it's not a block, within the file after that. So you can use it multiple times in a file.
All right, that's good. We've answered. All right, any other questions in IRC?
There's a great question that I was asked earlier from Theodore Brown, and it's so funny to ask after this conversation. Why has it taken this long to get scalar type hinting proposed and put into vote?
Yeah.
This has been a highly desired feature for the last 10 years. Why hasn't it been done?
I have a guess as to why. There's a bunch of reasons. Part of it is that we haven't had voting for very long. I mean, the modern RFC process really dates to 2011. I mean, you've had RFC processes before, but the one we're familiar with now, with the voting on the web page and certain people being able to vote and the 2/3 majorities for language changes, all this stuff, the sort of modern, sort of finalized RFC process came about sometime in 2011 onwards. So prior to that, as I understand it, I think we did have votes. I'm not sure. We did have voting on some proposals, but it didn't have quite the same structure. Not everything went to a vote. Some things were sort of decided among a small group of people. So that's part of it. So the other problem is just there's a lot of people, particularly older people. Some of the people who had a lot of influence in designing the language are far bigger fans of weak type hints, and like strict type hints are an abomination. They must not pass. They should definitely not be in PHP because I designed it, and PHP is not a language with strict types. Therefore, it shouldn't have them. A certain person in particular who is rather unconstructive keeps saying that, but I'm not going to name them because I think we all have various problems with them. I'm not going to name them.
Interesting. This leads on to another interesting thing, though, is that some people have been saying we should just vote on having weak types first and then vote on having strong types afterwards. Now, I'm going to throw that one over to Levi for a second, then we'll come back and ask you what you think about that, Andrea. Levi, how do you feel about the approach of weak first, and then maybe we'll try and add some strict options in later?
I don't like it. I believe that we should have one mode. Whatever we have, that should be the way it is. Like,
I think you just made Andrea rage quit the podcast.
But I think that this is not something that should be configurable in any kind of way, in my opinion. I prefer strict types for static analysis reasons and other reasons, but I actually would be willing to vote yes on a weak-only functionality, partly because we've cleaned up some of the weird conversions, right? So let me stop screen sharing. We're kind of over with that stuff. So I was saying that, weak types, we've kind of cleaned up some of the conversions. So we got rid of the hex conversions, or will shortly. I'm not quite sure on the status of that RFC, but Nikita Popov, hopefully I said his name correctly, took care of that. We have Saner float to integer conversions when floats are larger than an int can hold, they'll fail. So we've cleaned up some of the weak typing conversions. So I'm more okay with weaks than I've ever been in the past. And if we continue to make our type juggling more sane, then I think weak types could really work. But I don't think that. Go ahead.
Oh my god. Do you dislike the idea of scalar in general? Are you always against scalar, or is it this implementation of scalar?
No, I'm definitely against this specific RFC. I'm not opposed to having explicit scalar types, period. I think explicit scalar types of some form, whether weak or strict, could be good. I think weak is more likely to get accepted as a whole, because strict will cause some pain on the part of people using the functions, right? If you say this is an int and you pass it quote, one quote, well, it's not going to work. I'm of the opinion that type juggling should be, they're an important part of your program, right? Like you can't just
so you
delegate to magic, but I understand
that we have now a bit and keep it at that and not pursue strict at all, but keep the weak typing and maybe improve it some.
Yeah, I think if we improve some of the edge cases, notably, like if you have a string that starts with a number, and let's say the string is 4 geese, and you convert to an int, you get 4. And that's okay sometimes. The problem is that you can't know from a static perspective whether or not something will be able to convert. Like if you have some generic string that you don't know the value of, and you have an integer, if you don't really know if it can be converted properly, right? Like you can't know ahead of time in weak types. It's totally dependent on the value of the string. And that's where
a lot of the weird shit comes in, which is why people like strict.
Yeah, exactly. But in strict types, you have to manage every single conversion, and that can get tedious. Like it could be a pain. It really could. So I think weak types are the most successful, or I think weak types have the best chance of succeeding. They're more congruent with PHP's past, and I don't think we should add multiple modes of strictness. I don't think we should allow people to choose between them. I definitely don't think we should use declare. For me, that's out. I think voting on an RFC that includes declare should be no. It doesn't matter what that is, unless it's removing declare or something. The feature is kind of weird. And
all right, so I think we all agree declare kind of sucks. Andrea, would you like to counterpoint on the idea of strict typing in general? Fuck declare. Let's say we did it right. Just the idea of strict typing. Would you like to counterpoint that?
I can't remember. Were you arguing for or against strict typing? I also briefly missed that because I left my room to get another drink. So
I prefer strict typing, but realistically, I would be okay with weak types as long as we clean up some of our conversions, which we've already started to do.
No, hold on.
So I was kind of middle ground.
I'm pretty sure you just said you did not like the idea of strict typing in PHP, or you would like strict typing.
I personally like the idea of strict typing. I just don't think it would be success. I don't think a RFC that proposed strict types would pass.
Okay.
Yeah. That's so. Yeah, there's considerable opposition, particularly in internals, against weak types. With strict typing, I wasn't initially a super big fan of strict types, sort of, because weak types aren't very nice. There are some sort of kind of lossy conversions they allow. So 1.5 float can be converted to the int, and it'll be 1, and it's not even an error or a notice or something. I don't like things like that. Or the thing with a string, like 5 geese becomes the integer 5. That's not good. It does at least produce a notice, which you can trap, but it's still... On the other hand, strict typing seemed at least a bit too, well, strict, because PHP has sort of these implicit conversions, like the operators, sometimes return one type, sometimes return the other. But the reason I put strict types in this RFC was because it just didn't seem fair to only propose weak types, because the PHP community in general, not internals, but the PHP community, from what I've seen, seems to be quite in favor of strict typing. I mean, there are quite a few people who are in favor of weak typing as well, but it seems to be a majority, or certainly the loudest voices seem to favor strict typing. Not quite so on internals, which is slightly more weak typing, pro-weak typing. So I felt it wasn't really fair to only choose one or the other, and I really didn't want to see the sort of dual, not dual mode, not what I'm proposing, but having different types of type hints. I didn't want strict int type hints and then a different syntax for a weak int type hint, because I don't want to have to, if some API author loves weak types and I like strict types, I don't want to have to deal with sort of weak types because they chose it, and if another API author loves weak strict types, I don't want to have to use weak types. And within a function, I don't want to have to deal with 2 different, maybe 3 even different typing modes because PHP decided to support both in function definitions, especially if the same function had multiple arguments of different modes. Anyway, so this IRC has both weak and strict, and you can choose which you use. And importantly, everything's consistent. If you choose weak mode, everything's weak. If you choose strict mode, everything's strict. And I like it for that reason. It even makes internal functions strict. I really like that because it just means everything's consistent. I like consistency. But so I wasn't convinced about strict types. I didn't think they had a good chance of getting past internals. But I wasn't completely convinced of their benefits because I thought they'd be too strict. I thought they'd be a bit error-prone in practice. But then I actually tried them out in one of my projects. I took a small web app I wrote called PictoSwap. It's this little app for your Nintendo 3DS, if you have one, that lets you draw little notes and send them to people. And I went and ported, as part of this RC, I went and ported it to use this RC, so strict mode, return types, parameter types, and actually that convinced me of the benefits of strict mode because you find out things that you didn't otherwise. Like I spotted, for example, that I was passing floats, fractional values, to the GD draw line function, but that's bad because it's just going to be silently truncated, and that's really bad. That was one of the things that I spotted. Another was that all my JSON output, because I wasn't converting the types explicitly, because I was relying on weak types, all my JSON output was producing strings where there should be integers or floats. JSON just has numbers, but and some things that should have been booleans weren't, they were strings. And actually my database was giving me strings, and I didn't know this. And it turns out that I was completely ignorant to this because JavaScript is really weakly typed as well. And so my JSON was complete crap. And it just happened to work because JavaScript happens to have quite similar weak typing rules. And with strict typing, suddenly you notice, oh crap, I have this session ID, and it's actually a string when it should be an integer, and oh crap. And it was all those oh crap moments and noticing strict typing basically forced me to write better code, and I like that. And it also makes the conversions explicit. I don't like the explicit cast operators, but
so I think
it's at least obvious that it's happening. So the final bit is that I want to do both at once in one RFC because I don't think weak typing on its own would pass. And I think also weak typing on its own, the danger is that weak typing passes in one RFC and then someone proposes strict types in some form and it doesn't pass because weak types have passed and the old guard that likes only weak types only wants that. I think there's a chance that you might get a sort of compromise with this RFC because we might get both strict types and weak types, because I think it's only by having them together that we're ever going to get them into PHP, really. I don't think either on its own is going to pass.
I feel like that's the problem is if you look through a lot of the internals conversations, which I have been doing for the love of God, I can't think why. If you go through, if you go through people that suggest that we should just do like there are 3 different ways they think the vote should go. Some people that are a big fan of weak type hinting suggest that we should have a weak type hint vote first. Fans of the strong type hinting only approach are saying we should have a strong type hint first. Fans of both are saying we should vote both now. When every single party is saying the other party is being unfair when they recommend that their thing should go first. And the problem I can see there is absolutely that if we say like, oh, we should just do weak now and then we'll get to strict later, it'd be very easy for people to say, nah, actually, you know what, fuck strict at a later point. So right now, by trying to please both parties, we actually could get it through. And so far, the vote, amazingly, is in a majority, 2/3 majority. So I know it can be made to look a little bit disgusting, but I could do the same thing with namespaces. Like, Levi, some of the examples you gave there Like I could wrap up like a function in a namespace and another function in another one, and then call it over here, and it would look really confusing. But if you use declare as it should be, which is the top of the damn file, then it's really not going to be that close. The one last example someone said, if you were to use like another syntax for it, so not declare, and you had like open PHP tag with just the word strict after it, then you start putting it, or something like that, then you put it in a file that has like a closed PHP tag and then some fucking HTML because they're terrible at coding, and then some more stuff. What does that do? Is that like by block, and do people know that each time? So you can make it confusing any way you do it by having those sort of switches. So it's a bit of a tricky one.
With declare, I'll admit there are some problems with it, which is why I plan to get rid of it. But even if it doesn't, the main thing about declare is that people write shitty code. That's no excuse for allowing people to write shitty code, I confess. But with declare, I expect if we end up with only declare, I don't like it. I expect it probably become PSR coding standard. Put a declare at the top of the file. Only if it's used anywhere else in the file, put it in a block. Do not put it in its own, or something like that. But the key thing about it is that it's a pragmatic compromise, I think, because it allows people who like weak typing to live in a completely weak typed world where their code can use weak typing as much as they like, and it has zero effect on other people, whatever mode they want to use. And similarly, people who want to use strict mode get to have strict mode, and it has no effect on anyone using their code. And it means even if WordPress manages to use 57 declare statements in the same file within 100 lines of code, because that's the kind of thing that WordPress would... I'm sorry, someone's going to moan at me in the community for saying that WordPress would do something like that, and it wouldn't happen anyway, because WordPress doesn't use modern PHP versions.
Okay.
Is there, can we piss off like the other 50% of the community here while we're at it?
But, okay, sorry, I meant Laravel.
I don't want hate mail, alright? I've only just moved, I don't want hate mail.
Sorry.
Will strict typing work with facades?
But the thing is that ultimately, the great thing about this RFC, and basically only this RFC, is it only affects your code. Someone calling your code is not impacted by the choices you make. Minor exception is callbacks, but there's ways to deal with that. The great thing is that it would mean weak typing fans would get weak typing, no effect on strict typing fans. Strict typing fans would get strict typing, no effect on weak typing fans. And we can all live together happy, holding hands, with some libraries doing one thing, some libraries doing another thing, but everyone can agree, and it probably won't happen. But with voting, sorry for talking so long, incredibly, there are 9 days to go yet, but somehow enough people have been convinced that we now actually have not only a 2/3 majority, but 2/3 majority plus 4 votes. Somehow we've managed to get over that hill, and it might change yet. It's subject to change. There might be more no voters. Some yes voters might switch to no. I don't know. But it's looking positive. I really hope it gets in, because I don't know. It'd be a shame, because this proposal would mean, I think the big thing for me is not only that we get scalar type hints, but that we get strict scalar types, because I think it's probably the only way to do strict scalar types that has a chance of people who want weak types only voting for it, because this RFC does strict types without it affecting people who only like weak types, and none of the other proposals do that. I think it's probably the only way strict typing will get in. Anyway, sorry for talking so long.
We're going to wrap this up. Andrea, in under 2 minutes, because you will be muted in exactly 2 minutes, what final words would you like to leave to convince people to vote for your RFC?
Okay.
I think it's going to be the best answer ever.
What is happening?
You see this stuff? You see these lovely elephants?
I do.
You see these lovely elephants? You see this fork?
I do.
You know what I'm going to do to these elephants if you don't vote yes?
All right, Andrea's answer in play. She's going to murder an elephant.
Also, I'll leave the PHP community and go to hack, so vote yes. Please.
Or if you really want Andrea to leave the community, I guess, vote no.
All right, Levi, it's your turn to do the same thing. You have 2 minutes. Convince people to vote against this RFC.
For me, the two main points are that it uses declare. Some people think that that's kind of a strange detail that we can fix. I'm of the opinion that it may not get fixed, and if it doesn't get fixed, it's a really horrible detail. I would definitely, from that angle, vote no. I also don't think that the option to have both is very good. I can understand why it might be attractive. If you want strict, it might be the only way you ever get it. And I like strict personally, but I don't like the ability to choose, to be honest. I don't think that that's a quality in PHP that we should really push for, personally. So I would say that vote no on this RFC because declare is horrible, and I don't think we should allow both kinds. They should be one or the other.
All right. I feel like we're on Fox News all of a sudden. Does anyone else get that feeling? Okay.
Is this Crossfire?
Phil Sturgeon, close this bullshit out, please.
Tally out.
All right. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I hope we didn't lose too many of you. We'll be around for the after show if you want to just scream in frustration or if you want to chat further. See you later.